If you like dark secrets, true crime, and all the twisted hidden corners of history, smash subscribe, hit that bell, and drop a comment, because you are not ready for what we're about to uncover. It was just after midnight on June 12, 1962, when the first alarm rang. Across Alcatraz Island, the granite walls, cold, imposing, built to break spirits, seemed to shudder. Inside cell block D, a routine head count revealed 3 men missing. No sightings, no dummy bodies in bunks, just emptiness. Officer James Benton was the first to report it. He stood on the narrow, steel-lined corridor, flashlight trembling in his hand. He expected to find dead men, maybe a desperate suicide or a brutal fight. But as he shone his light into the barack, the cell bars remained painfully empty. Somewhere, beyond the concrete and corrugated steel, 2 brothers and a 3rd inmate had disappeared. Just like that. Elsewhere on the island, prison guards discovered bizarre, handcrafted dolls with lumps of plaster for heads tucked into pillows. In the flickering glow of lanterns, the faces looked eerily real, hair glued into place, eyes painted on. One guard, pale and voice trembling, whispered, "They thought we'd never notice." The 3 inmates, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, were not newcomers. Morris was known as a brilliant escape artist, serving time for bank robbery. The Anglins had their own reputations, resourceful, daring, and deeply determined. Over weeks, according to interviews later recorded in prison logs, they had meticulously carved around the ventilation holes in their cells, secretly chipping away concrete and expanding the gaps just enough for their bodies. They used small, improvised tools, spoons, saw blades, even a rudimentary drill made from a vacuum motor. Word of their plan spread slowly through the prison. Some inmates whispered that Morris talked in riddles. You don't see the air vent till it's gone. Others noticed the sound of scraping late at night, a faint rhythm that matched no sanctioned maintenance work. Guards reported strange steam noises in the walls, but by then the conspirators had set up their hideout deep within the structure, far from prying eyes. Back in the surveillance tower, Lieutenant Harris stared at the binoculars, trying to picture how anyone could vanish from the fortress. The lighthouse light from a nearby mainland blinked like a distant lifeline, but there was no sign of a raft or any watercraft departing. Meanwhile, the salty breeze from the bay carried an ominous weight, as though the wind itself were complicit in the escape. Suddenly, a guard radioed that a life vest had been found, homemade, patched together from raincoats stitched meticulously at odd hours by unseen hands. It was found in the corridor between Block C and D, discarded, as though someone had shed it after climbing. The underground utility tunnels were searched, the guardhouses scoured, yet no shadows of men carrying that vest, no footprints on the rooftop. Worse yet, when officers climbed into the ventilation shaft, they found evidence of the climb, scuffs on the bars, fresh concrete dust, even a scorched mark near the steam pipe. Whoever these men were, they didn't leave in a hurry. They moved with planning, patience, and chilling calm. Detectives from San Francisco were summoned. With grim faces, they flew over in helicopters, sweeping their lights across Angel Island and the bay. Boats circled in the water below, searching for bodies or escaped men. But the search brought nothing. No floating crates, no paddling crafts, no frantic calls for help. The 3 men seemed to have simply dissolved into thin air, swallowed by the fog and the dark water. Back at Alcatraz, anxiety rippled through the cell blocks. Inmates locked in their bunk beds stared at each other, questioning loyalties. Some prisoners claimed they'd heard arguments in Morse code, tapped out late at night. Now is the hour. Others swore they saw ropes dangling from a roof, cut just after the escape. Lieutenant Harris stood at the edge of the roof, wind whipping cold salt spray in his face. He peered down at the bay below, knowing that if the men made it to the water, their odds of survival were absolutely grim. The currents of San Francisco Bay were notoriously treacherous, and the night was cold. But as he watched, a piece of driftwood bobbed by. Maybe a life raft, maybe something else. Inside the warden's office, frantic phone calls hopped across desks. Law enforcement assembled case files. FBI agents raised the alarm. But the 3 fugitives had vanished. And when the prison guards rechecked the dummy heads left in bunks, they realized just how human those plaster faces seemed. like someone had practiced, learned, rehearsed. What was going on behind those walls? Who had helped them? And where had they gone? The escape was no simple breakout. It looked like a whisper network, a conspiracy built in concrete hollows, steam tunnels, and vent shafts. Someone had covered their tracks on the inside, and maybe even on the outside. And when the FBI joined the investigation, they uncovered something even more disturbing. The men had left behind not just a raft and dummy heads, but ghostly footprint of a plan so thorough, so audacious, that no one could believe they'd pulled it off without help. But when they opened the utility hatch under the roof, what they found changed everything. The morning fog hung heavy over the bay as investigators pored over the clues left behind. For the first time, the sheer audacity of the escape began to sink in. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers hadn't just vanished. They had orchestrated a disappearance that made the steel walls, gun towers, and watchful eyes of Alcatraz almost irrelevant. Lieutenant Harris had gathered a team of detectives and forensic specialists. They climbed into the labyrinth of vents and utility tunnels, carefully measuring each notch, scuff, and mark left by the escapees. What they found was startling. Hidden handholds carved into the concrete, minor repairs hastily applied to conceal damage, and even tiny scraps of fabric from the raincoat raft. Whoever had executed this plan had an engineer's precision, a criminal mastermind's patience, and nerves of steel. Meanwhile, the FBI intensified its search. Helicopters scanned the churning waters for any signs of the missing men. But the currents of the San Francisco Bay were merciless. Coast Guard officers reported debris, bits of wood, sections of the raincoat raft, and a few personal effects, but no human bodies. Every potential lead suggested a tantalizing possibility: survival. Yet the official line remained grim. The men were likely drowned. Back on Alcatraz, tension simmered among the inmates. Rumors spread of accomplices, secret alliances, and whispers of betrayal. One inmate, recently transferred from another facility, claimed to have overheard Morris and the Anglins planning for months. They knew every guard rotation, he said, every hidden pipe, every blind spot. Other prisoners suggested that sympathetic staff members had provided tools or cover for noises in the night. If true, the escape wasn't just a feat of cunning. It was a network, invisible but deadly. The investigation then took an unexpected turn. A local fisherman reported a sighting near Angel Island, a small, homemade raft spotted in the early hours of June 12th, partially submerged, drifting in the current. According to the fisherman, it seemed abandoned but freshly used. Agents rushed to the scene, photographing every detail, but the raft had disappeared by the time they returned. It was as if it had melted into the water, leaving only speculation and dread behind. Detectives turned their focus inland. The Anglin brothers had family on the East Coast, and Morris had a few old contacts who might provide shelter. Interviews were conducted, old photographs scrutinized, and phone records traced. Each inquiry raised more questions than answers. Friends reported that the brothers had been unusually secretive in the weeks leading up to the escape, practicing small tasks repeatedly, and even disappearing for hours without explanation. Morris had been seen making precise, meticulous sketches of the prison layout, diagrams of pipes, vents, and hidden stairways, the kind only a man with an engineer's mind could conceive. But it wasn't just physical evidence that haunted the investigators. Letters began to surface, decades later, suggesting that someone had survived. One, discovered in 2013, claimed to be from John Anglin. "We made it. Hardly a day goes by that we don't remember the cold and the fear, but we are alive." Forensic tests attempted to verify authenticity, comparing handwriting and DNA samples to the family, but the results were inconclusive. No one could confirm the letter's origin, yet it reignited the mystery, suggesting the men might have defied the impossible. The investigation also uncovered strange coincidences. Local residents reported seeing 3 men matching their descriptions near rural towns in the Midwest. A few claimed to have heard whispered stories of bank accounts mysteriously appearing, small cash deposits, and sightings of individuals who vanished before any authorities could intervene. Each clue was tantalizing, yet frustratingly incomplete. The trail zigzagged across the country, and then evaporated. Even within law enforcement, suspicions arose. Had there been inside help? Could guards, knowingly or unknowingly, have aided the escape? Some officers were scrutinized, their records combed for anomalies, but nothing overt ever appeared. Still, the lingering unease suggested conspiracy, a hidden hand guiding the disappearance from the shadows. Then came the most chilling discovery of all. Agents returned to the vent shafts, inspecting the debris more thoroughly. Behind a loose panel, partially obscured by years of dust and rust, they found an envelope. Inside, detailed notes, measurement of the guards' routines, diagrams of escape routes, and a shocking message written in coded shorthand. It hinted that the plan was bigger than anyone imagined, that the escapees had left contingencies, backup plans, and, most disturbingly, a warning. They were not done. By now, the investigation had reached a fever pitch. Every lead seemed to open more questions than it answered. Were the 3 men alive or drowned? Had they received help from outside? And perhaps the most unnerving thought of all, if they survived, what were they planning next? And then in the warden's office, a security camera film from a rarely used hallway surfaced. It showed shadows moving in the night. Too precise, too deliberate to be coincidence. The faces were obscured, but the movements were unmistakable. The footage ended abruptly, leaving investigators with a single terrifying thought. They had underestimated the men. The escape wasn't just a breakout. It was the beginning of something far larger. When they traced the film to its source, they discovered a hidden compartment behind the office wall. And inside it, a set of maps marked with routes and codes that no one could immediately decipher. What they found next would shake the case to its core. The hidden compartment behind the warden's office wall revealed maps so precise they could have been drawn by a military engineer. Every alley, pier, and unguarded shoreline was marked, along with notes on tides, currents, and patrol schedules. Someone had meticulously planned not just an escape from the prison, but a complete vanishing act. Investigators pored over the maps, each detail more chilling than the last. It suggested Morris and the Anglin brothers had contingency plans spanning months, possibly years. FBI analysts ran simulations on the currents in San Francisco Bay. Could anyone survive in those icy waters with nothing but a raft made from stitched raincoats? The data was grim. The bay's waves were unpredictable and dangerous, but the men had left small indicators on the maps, floating debris, drift patterns, even hidden markers in the water. Whoever they were, they had calculated the odds with frightening precision. Meanwhile, law enforcement began tracing every possible lead inland. A pattern emerged. Bank accounts with unusual deposits, rental cars rented under pseudonyms, and intermittent sightings in small towns. Witnesses remembered 3 men matching the escapees' descriptions. One elderly farmer recalled a visit from strangers in 1962, the Anglins, he claimed, asking for shelter, speaking with a careful, deliberate tone. But by the time authorities followed up, the men had vanished. No fingerprints. No records. Nothing. Back on Alcatraz, tensions among the staff reached a breaking point. Officers who had initially been skeptical of Inside help began quietly confirming suspicions. Some maintenance logs were falsified, some surveillance notes altered. Whether it was fear, loyalty, or a hidden conspiracy, someone on the inside had played a role. But no one would confess. The trail was becoming a labyrinth, twisting in ways the investigators could barely comprehend. Then, nearly a decade later, the case took an unexpected twist. A postmarked envelope arrived at the FBI field office in San Francisco, addressed anonymously. Inside was a letter, typewritten, claiming that the 3 men were alive, living quietly in South America. The letter included details that only someone with intimate knowledge of the prison and the escape could have known. The exact tools used, the dummy head's construction, and even the pattern of vent drilling. The letter was dismissed as hoax by some agents, but the possibility it was authentic sent ripples of unease through the investigative team. Forensic analysis of the letter could neither confirm nor deny its authenticity. DNA testing was inconclusive. The ink and paper of the era provided no definitive answers, and handwriting comparisons were impossible. All it did was deepen the mystery, forcing the investigators to ask the most terrifying question. If they had survived, what had they planned next? The maps, the letters, the sightings, they pointed to a careful, calculated plan to disappear entirely. Each clue was part of a puzzle that no one could complete. And the more investigators uncovered, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just an escape. It was a demonstration of control. Control over perception, over law enforcement, and over the narrative itself. By the 1970s, the FBI closed its official investigation, citing presumed drowning. But the U.S. Marshal Service continued to keep the men listed as wanted fugitives. Every few years, new tips surfaced. A car abandoned in a parking lot with 3 old suitcases, bank deposits in small amounts, letters left for family members. Nothing proved survival beyond doubt, but each report reignited the fascination, the terror, and the intrigue. Decades later, historians piecing together the evidence noticed something chilling. The escape had left no loose ends. There were no casual witnesses, no mistakes, no errors. Everything had been accounted for. The dummy heads, the vent drilling the raft, the climb to the roof, all part of a flawless operation. Whoever these men were, they had executed the ultimate vanishing act with military precision. Even today, the bay holds secrets. Fishermen report unusual floating debris, small scraps of cloth, even shadows on foggy nights that seem to move unnaturally. Some locals claim that the Anglin brothers and Morris survived, living quietly in remote towns or overseas. Others believe they perished in the icy waters, leaving only phantom footprints in the sand. And yet, the truth remains elusive. Investigators still stare at the maps, letters, and photographs, try to reconstruct events with a clarity that never fully comes. Alcatraz, a fortress built to contain the most dangerous criminals, had failed in one of its most audacious challenges. Its walls, meant to be impenetrable, had become the stage for one of the most mysterious disappearances in modern criminal history. The final question lingers. Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers cheat death, living out their days in secret freedom? Or did the bay finally claim them, hiding their bodies beneath its cold, relentless currents? We may never know. If you thought the escape was the end, think again. The walls of Alcatraz have stories that refuse to die, and somewhere, hidden behind fog and salt water, the truth waits, waiting to be uncovered by those bold enough to search.